In the shadowed corridors of power, where ambition meets reality and weakness becomes a fatal flaw, there exists a philosophy so potent that it has shaped empires and toppled kingdoms. This is the realm of Niccolò Machiavelli, a man who dared to peer behind the veil of human nature and reveal truths that most would prefer to keep hidden. His insights into power, manipulation, and the destruction of one's weaker self form a blueprint for becoming truly unstoppable. The concept of destroying one's weak self is not merely philosophical, it is a practical necessity for anyone who seeks to navigate the treacherous waters of human interaction and emerge victorious. Machiavelli understood that the greatest enemy we face is not external opposition, but the limitations we impose upon ourselves through fear, sentimentality, and misplaced morality. The man who can systematically eliminate these internal weaknesses becomes a force of nature that cannot be stopped by conventional means. Consider the modern executive who rose from humble beginnings to control a multinational corporation. In his early years, he possessed empathy that bordered on naivety, a tendency to trust too readily, and an aversion to conflict that kept him in mediocre positions. The transformation began when he recognized these traits as chains that bound him to mediocrity. Through careful study and ruthless self-analysis, he identified each weakness and systematically destroyed it. The process was neither quick nor pleasant. He forced himself into situations where his natural empathy would be a liability, learning to view human relationships as strategic alliances rather than emotional bonds. When colleagues sought to undermine his projects, instead of retreating or appealing to fairness, he gathered intelligence on their own vulnerabilities and struck first. Each victory over his former self made him stronger, more calculating, and ultimately unstoppable. This transformation illustrates a fundamental Machiavellian principle: the weak self must die for the powerful self to be born. This death is not metaphorical, it requires the literal destruction of behavioral patterns, emotional responses, and cognitive frameworks that limit effectiveness. The person who emerges from this process bears little resemblance to the original, having shed the comfortable illusions that keep most people trapped in cycles of defeat and disappointment. The psychology behind this transformation draws from Machiavelli's understanding of virtue, not virtue in the conventional moral sense, but the ability to adapt to any circumstance and employ whatever means necessary to achieve one's objectives. Virtue requires the destruction of moral squeamishness, the elimination of predictable patterns, and the cultivation of strategic thinking that supersedes emotional reactions. In the political arena, we observe this principle in action through leaders who began their careers as idealistic reformers but evolved into pragmatic operators capable of making decisions that their younger selves would have found abhorrent. The successful politician learns to compartmentalize personal feelings from strategic necessities, to smile while planning an opponent's downfall, and to sacrifice short-term popularity for long-term power accumulation. The process begins with radical self-assessment. Most people live with a carefully constructed self-image that emphasizes their positive qualities while minimizing or ignoring their weaknesses. The aspiring Machiavellian must strip away this comforting fiction and confront the brutal reality of their limitations. This requires examining every failure, every moment of hesitation, every instance where fear or sentiment prevented decisive action. The weak self reveals itself through predictable patterns: the tendency to avoid difficult conversations, the need for approval from others, the impulse to play fair when opponents operate without such constraints, and the belief that good intentions will somehow triumph over superior strategy. Each of these patterns represents a vulnerability that enemies can exploit, a weakness that must be identified and eliminated. The destruction process involves deliberate exposure to situations that challenge these weak patterns. The person who fears confrontation must seek out conflicts where the stakes are manageable but the pressure is real. The individual who craves approval must practice making decisions that others will disapprove of but that serve strategic objectives. The one who relies on fairness must learn to exploit advantages that others might consider unsporting. This systematic desensitization creates a new behavioral framework built on calculation rather than emotion, on strategic thinking rather than moral reflexes. The transformed individual becomes capable of actions that their former self could never have contemplated, not because they have become evil, but because they have transcended the limitations that conventional morality imposes on effectiveness. The corporate world provides countless examples of this transformation in action. The successful entrepreneur who began as a team player learned to make decisions that benefited the company even when they harmed individual employees. The effective negotiator who once sought win-win outcomes discovered that sometimes winning requires the other party to lose completely. The powerful executive who formerly operated with transparency learned the strategic value of information asymmetry and selective disclosure. These transformations are not betrayals of character but evolutions toward greater effectiveness. Machiavelli argued that the prince who refuses to learn cruelty when circumstances demand it will eventually be destroyed by those who have mastered such skills. The same principle applies to anyone seeking to operate successfully in competitive environments where others are willing to employ any means necessary to achieve their goals. The psychological mechanisms underlying this transformation involve the systematic rewiring of emotional responses and decision-making processes. Where once guilt might have prevented necessary but unpleasant actions, the evolved individual experiences satisfaction at having chosen effectiveness over sentiment. Where once fear of rejection might have caused hesitation, the transformed person finds strength in the knowledge that their decisions are based on strategic rather than emotional considerations. This rewiring extends to interpersonal relationships, where the Machiavellian learns to view others not as complex individuals deserving of moral consideration but as variables in strategic calculations. Friends become assets to be cultivated, enemies become problems to be solved, and neutral parties become resources to be converted or obstacles to be circumvented. This perspective enables rapid decision-making and consistent execution without the paralysis that moral uncertainty often creates. The transformed individual develops what might be called strategic sociopathy, the ability to temporarily suppress emotional responses that interfere with necessary actions while maintaining the appearance of normal social functioning. This is not true sociopathy, which involves the absence of empathy, but rather the conscious control of empathetic responses when they conflict with strategic objectives. Physical transformation often accompanies this psychological evolution. The posture becomes more commanding, the voice more authoritative, the gaze more penetrating. These changes are not artificial affectations but natural expressions of internal transformation. The person who has destroyed their weak self projects an aura of competence and dangerousness that others instinctively recognize and respond to with either submission or careful respect. The intellectual component of this transformation involves developing systematic thinking patterns that prioritize outcomes over methods, long-term objectives over short-term comfort, and strategic advantage over conventional fairness. The transformed individual becomes capable of complex multi-step planning that accounts for various contingencies and human behavioral patterns, always maintaining flexibility to adapt as circumstances change. In the realm of leadership, this transformation manifests as the ability to make difficult decisions quickly and implement them effectively despite opposition. The leader who has destroyed their weak self can terminate loyal but incompetent subordinates, restructure organizations despite personal relationships, and pursue strategies that may cause short-term hardship but serve long-term objectives. These capabilities distinguish truly effective leaders from those who achieve temporary popularity but fail to create lasting success. The financial world demonstrates this principle through traders and investors who began their careers with conventional moral frameworks but learned to profit from others' misfortunes and to act on information that disadvantages their counterparts. The successful operator in this environment must overcome natural reluctance to take advantage of others' mistakes and develop the ability to act decisively when opportunities arise, regardless of the broader implications for market stability or individual welfare. The social dynamics of this transformation create interesting psychological effects. The person who has successfully destroyed their weak self often finds that their previous social circle becomes uncomfortable with their evolved perspective and capabilities. Former friends may express concern about changes in personality, colleagues may become more cautious in their interactions, and family members may struggle to understand the new behavioral patterns. This social isolation is often a necessary phase of the transformation process. The evolved individual must learn to operate without the emotional support systems that previously provided comfort but also enabled weakness. Independence from others' approval becomes not just a strategic advantage but a psychological necessity for maintaining the new behavioral patterns. The replacement social network that emerges consists of individuals who either share similar levels of strategic thinking or who can be useful for achieving specific objectives. These relationships tend to be more transactional and less emotionally satisfying than previous connections, but they provide greater practical value and impose fewer constraints on strategic decision-making. Advanced practitioners of these principles learn to maintain multiple personas simultaneously, presenting different aspects of their personality to different audiences while maintaining internal consistency around their core strategic objectives. This compartmentalization allows them to preserve certain emotional connections while preventing these relationships from compromising their effectiveness in competitive environments. The maintenance of this transformation requires constant vigilance against the re-emergence of weak patterns. The human tendency toward emotional comfort and moral simplicity creates ongoing pressure to revert to previous behavioral patterns, especially during periods of stress or uncertainty. The truly transformed individual develops systematic practices for reinforcing their evolved perspective and maintaining their strategic capabilities. These practices might include regular review of past decisions to identify any lapses in strategic thinking, deliberate exposure to situations that challenge their resolve, and cultivation of relationships with others who share similar levels of strategic sophistication. The goal is to make the new behavioral patterns so deeply ingrained that they become automatic responses rather than conscious choices. The ultimate expression of this transformation is the development of what Machiavelli would recognize as true virtue, the ability to adapt to any circumstance and employ whatever means necessary to achieve one's objectives while maintaining the flexibility to change tactics as situations evolve. The person who achieves this level of development becomes genuinely unstoppable because they are no longer constrained by the emotional and moral limitations that prevent others from pursuing effective strategies. In the realm of personal relationships, this evolution enables the individual to form connections based on mutual benefit and strategic alignment rather than emotional need or conventional social expectations. These relationships tend to be more durable and satisfying because they are built on realistic assessments of what each party can provide rather than romantic illusions about human nature. The professional applications of this transformation extend beyond traditional competitive environments to include any situation where multiple parties compete for limited resources or where success requires overcoming opposition. The transformed individual can navigate office politics, negotiate complex agreements, and build organizational power with an effectiveness that those bound by conventional moral constraints cannot match. The creative industries provide particularly interesting examples of this transformation in action. The successful artist or writer who began with pure creative motivations learns to view their work as a product to be marketed and their relationships as networks to be leveraged. This does not diminish the quality of their creative output but rather enhances their ability to ensure that their work reaches its intended audience and achieves its maximum impact. The educational implications of these principles suggest that traditional moral education may actually handicap individuals for success in competitive environments. The person who has been taught to always be honest, to seek fair outcomes, and to prioritize others' welfare may find themselves at a severe disadvantage when competing against those who have learned to employ more flexible ethical frameworks. This creates a paradox for society. The behaviors that make communities function harmoniously may not be the behaviors that enable individual success in competitive environments. The resolution of this paradox often involves learning to operate with different ethical frameworks in different contexts while maintaining enough consistency to avoid psychological fragmentation. The psychological health implications of this transformation are complex and vary significantly among individuals. Some people experience liberation and increased life satisfaction after destroying their weak patterns and developing greater effectiveness. Others may struggle with isolation or a sense of having lost authentic human connection. The key is developing the transformation in ways that enhance rather than diminish overall life satisfaction. The technology sector provides numerous examples of individuals who have successfully navigated this transformation while maintaining psychological health and achieving remarkable success. These individuals learn to view competition as a game with specific rules and develop the skills necessary to excel within that framework while preserving certain personal values and relationships that remained important to them. International relations demonstrate these principles on a macro scale, where nations that refuse to acknowledge the realities of power competition often find themselves at the mercy of those who have embraced Machiavellian thinking. The most successful nations learn to project strength while maintaining flexibility, to honor agreements when beneficial but to break them when necessary, and to pursue their interests with single-minded focus while maintaining the appearance of broader moral concerns. The historical examples of successful Machiavellian transformation span centuries and cultures, suggesting that these principles represent fundamental aspects of human nature and social organization rather than cultural aberrations. From ancient Chinese strategists to modern corporate leaders, the pattern remains consistent. Those who can destroy their weak selves and embrace strategic thinking achieve levels of success that are impossible for those who remain constrained by conventional moral frameworks. The implementation of these principles requires careful attention to timing and context. The person who attempts to transform too quickly or too completely may trigger defensive responses from others or may sacrifice important relationships unnecessarily. The most successful transformations involve gradual evolution that allows the individual to maintain important connections while steadily increasing their strategic capabilities. The measurement of successful transformation involves assessing both outcomes and psychological state. The truly transformed individual should experience increased effectiveness in pursuing their objectives while maintaining psychological equilibrium and life satisfaction. If the transformation creates internal conflict or unhappiness, it may indicate that the process needs adjustment or that certain aspects of the previous self should be preserved. The integration of Machiavellian principles with modern psychological understanding suggests that the most effective approach involves conscious development of strategic thinking capabilities while maintaining awareness of one's emotional and social needs. This balanced approach enables the individual to operate effectively in competitive environments while preserving the human connections and experiences that provide meaning and satisfaction. The long-term implications of widespread adoption of these principles could fundamentally alter social dynamics and organizational structures. As more individuals learn to operate strategically, the competitive environment becomes more sophisticated, requiring even greater levels of strategic thinking to maintain advantages. This escalating cycle could lead to the emergence of new social norms that explicitly acknowledge the realities of power competition while establishing frameworks for managing its effects. The ultimate goal of destroying one's weak self is not to become a monster but to become maximally effective while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. The person who achieves this transformation can pursue any objective they choose with confidence that they possess the capabilities necessary to overcome obstacles and achieve success. This freedom from internal limitations represents the truest form of personal power and the most reliable foundation for achieving whatever life outcomes one desires. In the modern era, where traditional power structures are constantly evolving and new forms of competition emerge regularly, the ability to destroy one's weak self and embrace strategic thinking has become not just advantageous but essential for anyone seeking to achieve significant success. The alternative is to remain trapped by emotional and moral constraints that prevent effective action and ensure eventual defeat by those who have learned to transcend such limitations. The journey toward becoming unstoppable through the destruction of one's weak self is neither easy nor comfortable, but it represents the most reliable path to achieving genuine personal power and the freedom to pursue one's objectives without constraint. Those who undertake this transformation join the ranks of history's most successful individuals, not because they lack conscience or human feeling, but because they have learned to control these impulses when they conflict with strategic necessities. The man who destroys his weak self cannot be destroyed by others because he has already eliminated the internal vulnerabilities that enemies might exploit. He operates from a position of psychological strength and strategic flexibility that makes him adaptable to any circumstance and capable of turning any challenge into an opportunity for advancement. This is the true meaning of becoming unstoppable, not the absence of obstacles, but the presence of capabilities that can overcome any obstacle that may arise. The legacy of Machiavelli's insights continues to shape our understanding of power, strategy, and human nature. His recognition that effective action sometimes requires the temporary suspension of conventional morality remains as relevant today as it was 5 centuries ago. Those who can learn from his teachings while adapting them to contemporary circumstances will find themselves equipped with capabilities that provide significant advantages in any competitive environment. The choice to destroy one's weak self and embrace Machiavellian principles is ultimately a choice about what kind of life one wishes to lead. Those who prefer comfort, predictability, and the approval of others may find happiness within conventional moral frameworks. But those who seek to achieve significant objectives, to build lasting success, and to exercise genuine influence over their circumstances will find that the path forward requires the destruction of weakness and the embrace of strategic thinking that transcends conventional limitations. In this transformation lies the secret of becoming truly unstoppable, not through the acquisition of external power or resources, but through the elimination of internal weaknesses that prevent maximum effectiveness. The person who completes this journey emerges with capabilities that cannot be taken away by others because they exist within the transformed psychology rather than in external circumstances. This internal transformation represents the most reliable foundation for achieving whatever objectives one chooses to pursue, making it the ultimate expression of personal power and the truest path to freedom from the constraints that limit most human lives. The dark psychology of Machiavelli offers not just insights into manipulation and control, but a blueprint for transcending the limitations that prevent most people from achieving their full potential. The man who destroys his weak self gains access to capabilities that those bound by conventional thinking cannot imagine, becoming a force that shapes rather than is shaped by circumstances. This is the essence of becoming unstoppable, the achievement of psychological and strategic superiority that enables one to pursue any objective with confidence and ultimate success. The transformation is complete when the mirror reflects not the person you were, but the force you have chosen to become. In that reflection lies the power to shape reality according to your will, limited only by the scope of your imagination and the reach of your ambition.